What's up everybody? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Crypt13 and in today's video I want to talk about Kazuha's Constellations. My last Kazuha video got really long and I didn't have enough time to go over this, so this video is dedicated to that. So let's jump right into it. His C1 is a buff to his E skill. It gives him a 10% cooldown reduction to both the press and the hold, and upon using his elemental burst, it's going to reset his elemental skill. 10% cooldown reduction means that for his press, it's going to go down from 6 to 5.4 seconds, and for the hold, from 9 down to 8.1. With a high elemental particle count generation from his E skill and just a 60 energy cost elemental burst, I think that a C1 is going to be very valuable for people that really want to play Kazuha. Kazuha's C2 allows him to actually give flat elemental mastery to his team members. Casting his elemental burst will give 200 elemental mastery to his party. 200 elemental mastery also means an 8% increase to the elemental damage bonus on top of what he was already giving. Kazuha's C4 allows him to generate energy a little bit faster. So when his energy is lower than 45, pressing or holding his E skill is going to give him either 3 or 4 energy respectively, and then also while gliding he is going to regenerate 2 energy per second. The gliding portion of this constellation is kind of weird to me because it seems like it would interrupt the flow of battle. This is just me speculating, but maybe it'll be better in practice, who knows, but I kind of do hope this one gets changed. Kazuha's C6 gives him an Animo infusion for 5 seconds when he uses his E skill or his Q skill. Additionally, for every point of elemental mastery he has, it's going to increase the damage of his normal, charged, and plunging attacks by 0.2%. So 5 seconds on an infusion means that Kazuha cannot maintain 100% uptime on this, which is kind of unfortunate. You are also forced to only use the press version of his E skill in order to keep this up. However, with the reset from his C1, you might be able to fill in those gaps with his elemental burst. 0.2% extra damage bonus doesn't seem like that good of a number on the surface, but as an example, if you run an Iron Sting with just one elemental mastery main stat artifact piece, that is going to give him 103.8% damage bonus to his normal plunging and charge attacks. And at the same time, he is going to give a 20.5% damage bonus to his party. Alright, now I'm gonna spend the rest of the video showing you guys some calculations I did for a C6 Kazuha, comparing mostly how we should build him. Should we build him for elemental mastery so he gets a bigger damage bonus to his normal charged and plunging attacks? Or should we just build him as a classic damage DPS build? At the end of the day, a C6 Kazuha is going to have roughly the same amount of normal, charged, and plunge attack damage no matter how you build him. Whether you build him as a classic DPS with attack percent, animal damage percent, and crit percent, you will still get roughly the same amount of damage if you build him for elemental mastery instead. But this is just that part of his kit. If you build him for elemental mastery, the damage on his E skill and elemental burst is going to go down in exchange for more swirl damage. So the question becomes, is the swirl damage enough to mitigate the loss in damage from his elemental skill and elemental burst? I will be seeking to answer that question in this video. So here are some calculations I did with a 2-piece Viridescent Venerer and a 2-piece Gladiator set to illustrate that point. So taking a look at this chart, we can clearly see that all of these builds are very similar in damage. The attack percent, elemental mastery, crit percent build is the one that edges out a little bit over the others, but it's really not by that much. And then if I compare this full DPS build to a full elemental mastery build, where the elemental mastery build doesn't have any crit, you'll see that the damage is quite significantly lower on our elemental mastery build, even with all of that damage bonus. And this is because we don't have any crit. Now I have a couple other calculations using other kinds of builds like a 2-piece Viridescent with 2-piece Wanderer or 2-piece Gladiator with 2-piece Wanderer, because a 2-piece Wanderer at C6 gives you about 16% extra damage bonus. However, if we look at the table of damage that I calculated here, we can see that their damage is pretty much still identical. I don't really need to graph this because it's really easy to see actually. Building him 3 different ways. First, with the classic, we can see that all of his normal attacks, his charge attacks, his high plunge attacks, and his Ascensive passive skill, they're pretty much all the same. The 2-piece Gladiator or 2-piece Wanderer Wander slightly edges out. If we look at a build where we swap out the Anemo damage percent for an Elemental Mastery build, we still see pretty much the same thing. Everything is dealing about 16,000 damage in crit, about 7,000 charge attack crits, and about 10k high plunge crits. And then the last combination where we swap out the attack percent for an Elemental Mastery, again, the pattern is the same. However, among all three different types of builds, the 2-piece Gladiator, 2-piece Wanderer seems to slightly edge out over the other two builds. However, when we have those Elemental Mastery artifact pieces in our builds, we do lose out on some damage on our E skill and Elemental Burst because his C6 doesn't give a damage bonus to that part of his kit. And since we remove either attack percent or Anemo damage percent, it follows that those skills will suffer in damage. So let's see how much swirl damage we can actually do now and find out if it's going to be enough to mitigate the loss in damage from our skills. Because after the 1.6 patch, swirl damage has been buffed quite a bit, along with Elemental Mastery. A full Elemental Mastery build with an Iron Sting hits about 4k damage per swirl. And remember that under the most ideal conditions, you can proc swirl a lot of times. At C6 with the cooldown reset and the ticks from his burst, you can get maybe 16 to 20 ticks with all of his skills if used in quick succession, and if I'm counting correctly. Actually, let me do a count really quick. We can do a cast E, and then a plunge attack, and then we activate our burst, and then we can cast another E skill, do another plunging attack, and then our burst is going to tick for about 4 times for Anemo damage. So I believe that comes out to around 9. So under ideal conditions where we have 2 enemies, you can get 2 swirl procs. So we double that, and that comes out to about 18. And I completely forgot about his Anemo infused auto attacks, and so since that's a thing, that's even more swirl procs. We however don't know the internal cooldown for it, so we can't say for sure how many more swirl procs we can get with his autos, but it is definitely looking like 20 plus within a single rotation. So please check out this graph where I plotted all of the swirl damage and all of the instances of damage from his Elemental Absorption and his Elemental Burst. Starting with 10 swirl procs, which since we counted it already is kind of on the low side. Yeah, it doesn't quite catch up to the full DPS build. But let's take a look at 16, and you can see that that gap is significantly closer now. So what's it gonna look like when we do 20? Well, take a look here. At 20, we actually deal slightly more damage. So that means a full Elemental Mastery build, even at C6, can potentially deal more damage if we get a lot of swirl procs. But that's the catch. You need to deal a lot of swirl procs in order for the damage to catch up. It's also pretty crazy because the full Elemental Mastery build is hitting absolutely no crits at all. I also plotted multiple swirl damage for our DPS builds and our half DPS builds. And you can see that the builds where I build a little bit of Elemental Mastery, they start to edge out because that swirl damage really does start to stack up. So let me show you the full Elemental Mastery builds compared to the half DPS builds. And it looks like the total damage between these builds are pretty much almost the same. So what this means to me is that at the end of the day, if you have a C6 Kazuha and you just want as much damage as possible, you really can't go wrong with just building him however you want. You have a lot of freedom in deciding how you want to build him. So I would make my decision based off of substats instead of artifact set bonuses. But I do think you should build Elemental Mastery in some way. That way, not only does he do a lot of damage with his normals and also with swirl, but he would also give some good damage bonus to the party. And remember that these Elemental Mastery builds rely on swirl, so under unideal conditions where you don't have enough enemies, you won't be able to proc enough swirl, and thus you're not going to be able to actually reach this amount of damage. That's all I got for you guys in this Constellation in-depth video, and I just want to end by saying that remember that these are simply calculations and just theory crafting. We need to wait and see how it's actually going to play out in the real game when he comes out to see if this is actually how things are going to go. Anyway, thank you if you made it this far, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more Genshin content, and until next time, I will see you guys later.